Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Church History for Chumps. My name is John, and I have my beautiful co-host with me.
What's up, guys? It's Thomas.
That's Thomas Duell, the man himself. And we actually have a very, very special guest with us today. This is our good friend, Michael, who I realized I didn't even bother to ask for your last name to give you a true introduction, Michael, so I apologize. But Michael is the creator behind the Instagram page known as Creative Orthodox. He is a fellow that I've been following for a while. He has some really, really cool artistic content. A lot of it he sketches, but he does some skits as well. A lot of it representing the Oriental Orthodox tradition. And I wanted to see if he wanted to talk about some church history with us. So Michael, thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maybe we could start by hearing your story. Where is your formation? Like, were you born into this Oriental Orthodox tradition? You mentioned to us that you're Egyptian by birth, but you're actually born in Egypt. Like, so what's your story? Just like with your faith, but then also where does that translate to? Your creative art now.
Yeah, so I was born in Cairo, Egypt. I lived there for my entire childhood, so 14 years. So cradle Orthodox, and in Egypt the Copts are so Coptic Orthodox, and the Copts are oppressed. They have been oppressed. I feel like that's the thing that gives them their strength and gives them all the saints and the martyrs that have come out of the Coptic Orthodox churches, because they've always been under that pressure. And I think it strengthened the church so much. So growing up, even at school, almost not really sheltered, but like for example, like when it came to religion class or religious class, like they would hold like the Muslim like lessons and whatever during like in the main class, and then all the Christians from all the other classes would just like all the Copts would just leave the class and get together, and then we just find somewhere to like hold our lessons. So things like that, like everywhere you go, there's like obviously the spot where I was, it wasn't like the most intense persecution. There are villages in Egypt where even till today, like Copts are being killed just for being Copts. But it gives the church its strength, and that's, I think, was at the heart of my upbringing. Like my entire life revolved around church. The typical like situation that you would imagine for a cradle Christian. When it came to the fathers, that actually started very early on with my grandfather used to he loved the saints. And he was so much fun. Like I would wrestle with him, like just had a very close relationship with him. And so I remember they lived in a neighboring city, and when they would come visit, stay with us a few days, he would bring his plastic case. We'd go in my dad's library, and then he would open his case and then take out a picture of a saint, like one by one, and he'd be like, "Do you know who this is? Do you know who this is?" And he would tell me their stories. And I would say like most cradle typical cradle stories, it became too much of a habit, where I memorized the stories. I knew all the right answers in Sunday school, whatever. My entire life revolved around church. And then we moved from Egypt. So we immigrated to Canada. I was 14 years old, came to Ontario, Kitchener, where I live now. And for me, this was a big thing because I can't stress how much I knew about church. I just like memorized things. So in Sunday school, I just knew all the answers. But I came here, and it was apparent to me how empty all of that was. I was doing it out of the habit. I was doing it out of the fact that was my life. That was my social life. That was everything. And so I for the longest time, I just didn't. I mean, you can imagine it's slightly traumatic for a 14-year-old to like lose their entire life and come and restart it somewhere else. And so I didn't want to go to church here. I didn't. Um, it just meant nothing to me so far, and that's sort of the idea, is that at its core, like somewhere along my life, it started from this genuine love, and it became this habit, this social construct. It's where I see my friends, and again, because of the persecution in Egypt, Copts tend to stick together, shelter together, live, like everything becomes that Coptic group
Yeah.
that you're with. And so when I came here, lost all that, I just didn't want to engage.
Mm.
And then one of my friends here, and then a friend group here embraced me. They were very loving, very awesome, and they're now my friends since then, which should be like 15 or 16 or 17 years ago. And they were so close to the fathers. One of them, who became a monk and then a priest, would go to like Saint Anthony's, and he's very close with Saint Anthony, and so and he showed me so much love, and I think that's sort of what got me right into it, because someone I love very much loved Saint Anthony. When it was Saint Anthony's feast every year, he would. Right now he's serving in the States, so. He's not in Canada anymore, but when it was St. Anthony's feast in January 30th, he would bake a cake and he would write the great St. Anthony on it. And we would stay up all night. We do vigil, and then we would read the story of St. Anthony from start to finish. And it just became this thing that we do yearly, and we all get excited for it. And when as a group you're doing something like this,
That's wonderful.
It's incredible, and that's sort of what got me right back into the church, is that love that started from something real, which is these are the friends that embraced me after I lost all my life, basically, and they love this saint very much. And then from there I sort of got right back into it in a real way, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you'd almost be fooled into thinking that it would be a step up in a sense to go from a community where Copts are so like marginalized and like looked down upon, and say, oh well, you're in a Western nation now where they value religious freedom. You don't have to worry about that anymore. But what you also lost was like while you maybe lost the persecution status, you also lost the community that comes with being in a persecuted group. And to lose that, especially just from what I know of like the culture of community in the Middle East. I mean, I know Egypt, Middle East, it's kind of that's a blurry line, but like comparing that with, the Western European, North American world, it can be a jarring experience for anyone. So yeah, praise God that you got involved in such a beautiful group. That's such a cool story.
Thank you. And so that wasn't actually how the Creative Orthodox started. That's just how I didn't end up somewhere else dark and far from God.
Right.
But so then later, right when I graduated university, I took my first job. It was a marketing coordinator role. I was really excited, did my best, and then I got let go. And then for a year and a half after, I don't know if you've ever been through extended periods of unemployment, but it's very psychologically trying. The biggest thing is the day-to-day of not having any structure. And so I needed some structure. And so I wanted to, and I love drawing. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to start working on something. And I wanted to illustrate the life of Antony. And then I would start drawing sketches of Abba Antony, and I would take it to my friend who's really close with him. And he was just like, that's not him. That's not him. That's not him. That's not him. And I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't start with my first graphic novel. And then I looked at someone who has a thorough hagiography, or a lot of material I can draw from. And I found St. John the Short. And that's sort of how I started. I started posting my progress on my personal Instagram at first. And then I figured, okay, this this is a thing now, so might as well shift it. And I also wanted to kind of distance my own name because I didn't want this to become, oh, I'm liking, like, I didn't want this to become an ego thing, or it's likely already become an ego thing for me to stop it from ever becoming, because you probably know this, when you start doing anything in the way of service, you start getting fought in like left, right, and center.
Yep.
And so to give myself some of that grace and have a fighting chance, I tried to not make it related to my name at first, so it was just Creative Orthodox. So that's sort of the idea behind the name, is to just, as long as it's not my first name, last name, and when I'm posting, I'm like gaining followers to my name and whatever. It's like, nah, just distance yourself from that and keep it what it is, kind of thing.
Sure.
That's good.
Yeah. So now I'm even grateful that I didn't get your last name, because
right, your intro is spot on. Everything there was just
yeah. I mean, it's, this, obviously I'm not saying this to counter all the it's clear you're looking to stay humble about this, but I think it's worth acknowledging, like, your platform has really truly resonated with a lot of people. And I think that's, something to acknowledge and be grateful to God for. Like, what's the process been like, just kind of continuing to develop your artwork and seeing people, appreciate it?
So it's usually a really big project that's taking place in the back for over like the first, like the graphic novel, like A Forest in the Desert, the life of St. John the Short, that took 6 years to do. And so while that's happening, I'm usually just to keep practicing like the art and whatever. I look at the church calendar. And it's funny because I straddle both the Oriental and the Eastern calendar. It's the Julian and the Georgian calendar, Gregorian, sorry. And they're 13 days off, which is hilarious. Some saints align. I'm pretty sure like the big ones are the same across, but then some of them are just 13 days off. So if I post about a saint in one of the calendars, 13 days later, he's going to come again. And so it's just a funny process. Sometimes I'm posting things like 13 days apart. I'm like, sometimes I miss it on one, I catch it on the other. But I like staying close to the church calendar because it makes sense with the seasons of the church. Obviously the dates are usually related to the saints, the saints' feast day, but usually the respective churches would be celebrating that saint's feast like through liturgy at church. So I think it's neat that someone would go attend liturgy, listen about the life of the saint at liturgy, and then when they're on their phone after whatever, they come across an image or a saying. Like, I like that there's that moment of, okay, like connection between the liturgy and the crazy social sphere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I know that Thomas has a really strong affinity for the church calendar, and honestly, I think I'm starting to grow in that direction, which, it's just, Protestants don't get anything fun, man. Like, again, like we're like the schismatics of schismatics. So I get it. We don't deserve to have fun. I understand that the Lord has, set this up. I'm like, man, dude, like because I Thomas knows this. I just got back from my honeymoon. My wife and I were in Europe.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you so much. My wife and I were in Europe just exploring these like old, beautiful churches. And then you go to a Protestant church and it's like, looks like the front of a Kmart. And it's like, come on, man. You can still see where the cash register used to be. Like, come on. This is just the worst. Anyways, I digress. So Michael, did you have a figure that you'd like for us to dialogue about a little bit?
Yeah, I was thinking we talk about St. Arsenius. But this is a tough one because he's all about silence, and this is a podcast. So I don't know. If you're interviewing him, he'd show up and he'd just for 40 minutes.
That would be such a fun, like it's like a modern sayings of the Desert Fathers, where it's like St. Arsenius was brought on a local podcast and he said not a word.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. All right. Well,
So
let's
is this Arsenius the Great we're talking about, or
Yep.
sweet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what something I love about the Desert Fathers in general is that uh, when you first get introduced to them, you feel um like it's just one way. Like this is the silent monk. They're in the desert. They don't talk to anyone. They're praying all day and such, and it feels really overwhelming.
Mm,
And you start reading the sayings, and some of them seem really really harsh. But what I love is that once you actually get into it, you see how wildly different all the Desert Fathers are. Like you have obviously Anthony, you sort of he's the at the forefront of the fathers. I think you called him the grandfather, the desert grandfather. But he's just one personality, and one of the and showed one of the paths. And right after him came Saint Pachomius, who he said, you know what, Abba Antony started the eremitic life where people are staying alone in the desert. St. Pachomius came, and he came from a military background. So he was like, okay, I know how to set groups of people towards like saw it in the army. So why don't we apply these rules here?
mm,
Let's set you up like I would set up a unit in the army, and like, okay, can someone bake? You be the baker for the monks, blah blah blah. And here are your rules. Let's live together. This is great. This is going to work, and it did.
mm,
And both were perfectly fine and viable. You have Saint Moses the Strong, who was this absolute unit of a man,
oh,
and he and he was wildly different than the other Desert Fathers. And then uh, it's funny because even in the story of Arsenius, so let's roll back on Arsenius. So Arsenius came around the time right after Saint Anthony, so around the time of Saint John the Short, around the time of Saint Macarius, and he was in the court of King Theodosius, I believe. Let
so
me make
Michael,
sure that
just jump in a real quick bit. All of our listeners should already know plenty about the Desert Fathers because you're faithfully listening to all of our episodes. But for those who have, gone the wayward path, what's the timeline we're looking at here?
So for Arsenius specifically, we're looking at the fourth century, third and fourth century. For Saint Anthony, you're looking second, third century. Saint John, third, fourth century. But it's between third and fourth.
And are all these guys pretty much around like in the Egyptian desert?
Yeah. So right after right after Christ died, and then rose, and then all the apostles started preaching. Saint Mark goes to Egypt, and then the age of martyrdom starts. A whole ton of people die,
Mm,
and Christians were loving it. Christians were like, okay, let me see. In the gospel, our Christ died for our sins. Best thing to do for a man is to lay his life for his friends. We got to die for our faith. This is awesome. Christianity, like, let's do this. And there were a ton of martyrs in the reign of Emperor Diocletian.
mm,
And then that stopped. And Christianity became the accepted religion. And that was good because we stopped dying, but that was bad because we stopped having a reason to be good Christians, and we stopped having that incredible, heroic, valiant end to a Christian life.
mm,
And that sort of spurred monasticism.
mm,
That's when people generally were like, okay, you know what, like how do we martyr ourselves without killing ourselves? And the Gospels speak about that. It's not a novel idea, but it's the idea of like how if like your life is in your control. If someone is persecuting you, obviously this is it. But if they're not, now this is the point where you can take up your cross and make sure you're not living an easy life. Actually martyr yourself for Christ, like spend your time and money and resources helping others, and carving out time to be with God. And that's sort of what spurred monasticism, is because monasticism is because martyrdom stopped. And that was around the second century when St. Anthony went to the desert, St. Macarius went to the desert, and this is where Eremitic or singular monasticism got really popularized. And then from there, St. Pachomius went to the desert and he wrote the rules for how do we live in a community. And then you had thousands of monks. I believe at the time of St. Pachomius, it was between 5,000 and 7,000 monks. There was a historian, Rufinus, I believe. He writes, it's so funny. It's like a vlog basically, or a travel log. You read it and it's exactly like that. It's like me and 7 of my friends. We visited Egypt. So cool. And then went to this city. It's exactly like I completely see him being an influencer today. But he was saying there's so many monks in the city that the city had more monks than normal people, and there were even more outside the city.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, monasticism was in. It was the thing to be at the. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So the story of Saint Arsenius starts. He was a deacon at the court of the emperor, which is, as you can imagine, it's a good place to be. He was eating good. He had a good education. He was doing great. Christianity was accepted. Everything was great for Arsenius. And then he was charged to teach the future emperors, the 2 emperors. Let me get their names right: Arcadius and Honorius. And that was fine. He was teaching them Christianity. He was teaching them classical philosophy, just classical teaching kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, he gets the call. He gets the call to live in the. He asks God, how. Let me get his words right. He says, I think it's, what is the path to salvation, or something along these lines. Yes, Lord, guide me. How can I be saved? And he hears the Lord or the Spirit saying, Arsenius, flee people and you will be saved. And this is the thing. Like, this is what's so much fun about reading the Fathers, is you're reading it out of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. So these fathers that we talked about lived in the 4th century, and at some point had a lot of disciples. And these disciples were passing down their stories verbally, one to another. And that's what that's the Apothemata Patrum. And it wasn't written down in mind when you're reading this. You're reading, each single saying is probably something that was passed down hundreds of years from one monk to another, just orally, before they were even written down. And when they were written down, in there was a Coptic one, there was a Greek one, a Syrian one, and then they were all written down in Latin, and then obviously translated to English and everything else. But every time someone is translating it, they're sitting down and they're applying their own lens to what they think the words are saying. So what you're reading today, and like sometimes you read some of these sayings and you're like, I don't get it. And it's like, you have to remember, like this is like just keep that in mind. Like, even when you have a group of friends and one person says another person to their something to another person, and then you ask them, oh, what did I say? It comes out wrong at that point. You're talking about hundreds of years of that. And then it was written down, translated, written down, translated, written down, translated. And that's what we're reading today. So I think that's really cool. Like, I know that the side of like scholars trying to kind of like look at every translation and look at every word and try to be like, okay, this is not authentic. This is this can't be it. This whatever this, But I think it actually tells you more of a story, more about the saint than you even think it is. So my example, I this was a very long way to say, the sayings, when they were written down, one of the main formatting or formats that the sayings were put in is the Greek alphabet. So it starts with Alpha, Antony, and within the letter, they don't actually alphabetize it. They pick, starts with Antony, because obviously Antony, and then right after is Arsenius. So it gives us just an idea of like why Arsenius is like the writer of the sayings figured that this is a really important father to put right after Antony in the A's, in the alpha. And then beyond that, the first two sayings are about being a solitary monk. So what this tells me isn't that living alone as a monk is the only way to go, and every other monk who's living with other people and every other Christian who likes people is a sinner. What this tells me is the writer of the sayings found a cool pattern in two sayings for Abba Arsenius in living alone. And then there are a ton of sayings in Abba Arsenius's sayings about living alone, shunning people away, shutting his door. There's a lot of that. But what this tells me is that the writer who is writing this to a group of monks found it really beneficial to say, right after Abba Antony, who started that Hermetic monasticism, comes Arsenius, and he says the same thing. And he said it twice, and he said it like this, and he said it like that. This is what that's saying. I'm not really reading it as someone else would, which is this puts Arsenius against like Pachomius or whatever, or like any other monk who lived with people. Because the words start getting harsh. Let me read some of them. It's like, it goes from how can I be saved? Flee people and you will be saved. He asks again, after he had withdrawn from the world to live as solitary. It says, Arsenius, flee, maintain silence, and live a life of contemplative quiet. And then he goes to the desert, and there are about 3 or 4 more stories of the emperor going to him. Arsenius meets him with complete silence. So, and then the emperor visiting again, and Arsenius telling him, if you come to me again, I'm going to move and you're not going to know where I am. So don't do it. And so the emperor doesn't do it because he's like, I want him to stay there, kind of thing. And if he goes in the desert, there's just no way you're going to find him. And so there is a reading of the life of Arsenius as a very strong case for living. I don't think that that's the whole story. Yeah.
So how do you read it then? How do you interpret his life?
So this is what I love about the Desert Fathers, is their varying ways of salvation. So Arsenius, like thinking about the way that his life, so he was at this court, he can eat everything, he can drink everything, he's teaching the emperor's children. Like this is like, I don't know, what's the equivalent? Let's say who's an emperor? Bezos? Is Bezos a Musk? Is he?
He's like a super emperor. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're his kid.
You're his kid. You're his kid's teacher. His kid's teacher is probably getting paid a ton. His kid's teacher is probably living somewhere very comfortable, and not like by standards of a teacher. So Arsenius wasn't just living; he was living. So he leaves that and goes to the desert. First, he goes to St. Macarius, who sends him to St. John the Short. And St. John the Short was actually, St. John the Short had a very harsh Abba. This was a nice parallel, and I don't think people would catch it if they don't read these stories in parallel. St. John the Short, when he first became a monk, his Abba Amoy, his father, like in monasticism, kicked him out. He just shut the door. This was after, I believe, a 12-day trip from where St. John lives. After he said, he didn't say bye to his family, he just left everything and went 12 days in the desert. And you go and you find the person you're looking for, and they just shut the door. And he left him like this for 5 nights, which is like you're in the desert. You see this guy like Abba Amoy like leaving his cell, doesn't say anything, comes back, doesn't say anything. Some days he even goes out with a stick and beats Saint John to like leave. That's funny because I'm going to give you some insider knowledge. I didn't put this in the graphic novel at the time because I was foolish and young. Because I actually thought it puts Abba Amoy in a very negative light. I just couldn't reconcile it. I'm like, how is this God loving desert father just being so violent and just like have some compassion? It's a bit harsh, so I didn't include it. But I realize now that there's a lot of cultural, obviously, judgment on my part, and there's a part of it in the story of Saint John, and there's a part of it in the greater mythos of the saints, of like the desert saints. So let me continue with Saint John and get back to Saint Arsenius. So Saint John, after he gets kicked out, after 5 nights of that, Abba Amoy notices Saint John praying, and he sees that there are angels around him, and each one is putting a crown on Saint John. And it's not like this is a desert saint. This is just a kid who came from the city, and you kicked him out. And then 5 days later, you're seeing angels put crown on his head. You're like, oh, I made a mistake there. Okay, come here. And then he started teaching him, and he made him a monk and everything. So that's Saint John. Saint John had a very harsh master, but then he was different. He was compassionate. He, when his monks were working in the field, Saint John's back would be killing him, but he would not rest until every other monk was resting and drinking and whatever, and then he would rest. So he was very different than his Abba. Then he hears that there's this Arsenius guy that St. Macarius is sending him. He's like, okay, who's this Arsenius? He is, he's the teacher of the emperor's children. He's like, okay, all right. Like you're sending, this is the desert. You're sending me the teacher of the emperor's children. Like we're eating. Exactly. We're eating like a loaf of bread every two weeks. We're drinking like this much water over the course of the month. Like, what are we doing? And so he's like, okay. He goes to eat like once Arsenius arrives after a very long journey in the scorching Egyptian sun. It's like 40 degrees Celsius, like in the summer. Like it gets hot. And so he gets there. St. John collects all the brothers to eat together, and he doesn't invite Arsenius to the table. He tells him like he doesn't even acknowledge him. He's just like, cool, hi, and proceeds forward and starts eating with his disciples. And Arsenius doesn't say anything, and then St. John keeps eating, and St. John starts slowing down and enjoying the bread and just like looking over and being like, I'm just enjoying the bread. And St. Arsenius doesn't say anything. And then St. John throws him a piece of bread and he says, okay, you're like, at this point he knew he's going to be a good monk because he didn't complain, didn't ask to eat. Like even asking to eat, like just imagine after such a long trip, you're watching everyone eat and you're just standing there. And that's what Arsenius did. And that's what impressed Abba John. Mm-hmm. And so this is what, there's one of the elements that I love about the life of Arsenius is that he came from such a lavish life right into desert monasticism, and not just lavish life, highly educated, and that colored a lot of his experiences. Yeah.
I think there's something about our perception of the monastic experience where it's like, oh, I mean, yeah, that's a cool thing, but it's like when I remember when me and Thomas were talking about the Desert Fathers, one thing that he remarked was that the Desert Fathers were well respected by the theologians of that time. Because we kind of think there's almost like this dichotomy of like, you're either a very spiritual person, i.e. a monk, or you're a very intellectual person, i.e. a bishop or a theologian or something. And to show that like no, there's actually a bridge across this. Like someone like Arsenius, like was exactly what you would expect someone would be who would climb the ranks of priesthood, but instead was like, no, I'm going to live in the desert.
Mhm.
Because this is still, yeah, this is still for me. That was a calling he had.
Absolutely. It's actually, I mean, well respected maybe by the theologians, but by educated people, it doesn't come through in the text when you're reading, because these are obviously saints that are now popular and known and respected.
Mm,
But these were largely uneducated peasants, actually.
yeah.
And it's funny because in the story, this is one of the coolest moments in the story of Saint Anthony. And I'm not even talking about the time he fought with demons.
Right.
This time, a couple of Greek philosophers come to him. At this point, he's famous. He's known as Antony, the elder Antony. This man is amazing. His face shines when you look at him. Everything he says is wisdom. So these philosophers are like, oh, God, okay, what are they up to? Like, let's go and show them wisdom. They seek Antony. They go to Antony. They want to make an absolute fool of him. They're like, okay, like he might be wise, but does he know rhetoric? Does he know how to argue himself out of a conversation? And so they seek him out and they start asking him various questions. And they say, you don't even, Antony wasn't formally instructed, wasn't formally taught in Greek. His family was well off, but he wasn't. He didn't really learn, like have a classical education. So they told him that. They're like, you don't have a classical education. Why should we listen to you? And so Antony responded, which I think is such a wise, and it's just shut them up. He said, well, if you came all this way to talk to me, and so if you think that I'm uneducated, I'm not worth it to talk to me, then then you're the fools for making it this far. But if you're here, then might as well listen to me.
Mhm.
And it's just just like school the philosophers.
Yeah.
And so the saints of the desert were actually looked down upon from that respect. They were uneducated peasants. And
Sure.
so someone was telling Arsenius, how come how come you, an educated person, and like the person who was talking was also educated. He's like, how come us educated people don't have the same experiences as these peasants that were around, like the elders? He's like, they have so many more virtues, and how come us with all our education, whatever, don't? And then Saint Arsenius says, I might know Greek, I might know philosophy, I might know this and that, but I have no idea the alphabet of this peasant. I just can't even speak the alphabet of this peasant, which shows you how grounded he was, even with his educated background. He's like, no. These elders, they're living life as is. They see the world as it is, and we're just like don't even know the alphabet of the life that they're living.
Mm, yeah.
It's just one little anecdote. Sorry for interrupting you, but I was just,
Oh, you're good.
some monks, for example, live. It's just a different world. Like in Egypt, you can see them like they're walking around. Like for example, like a bird, they would just pick up the bird. The bird just sits on their hand, and they're just like walking around with that. They're just one with the world in such a strange way. They're just living in a different mode of being than than us mere mortals, than the rest of us. Like it really is, yeah, just living in a different mode of being, I feel.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Arsenius was doing. That's where his head was at. He's like, yeah, sure, I know everything, but like when it comes to virtues, when it comes to humility, when it comes to being one with God, look at them. They're incredible. They're kind of,
Yeah. When I one of my first experiences really learning more about the Desert Fathers was a really short little book that guy named Henry Nouwen wrote about the Desert Fathers, which was really, it was meant to be a brief introduction to the life, but it was really meant to be like almost like a modern exhortation of like, how can we take different elements of their life and apply them today? So when you think about that, and when you think about these like incredible stories of these men who lived these deeply devoted spiritual lives, yeah, what does that look like for you, and just how you live and move?
This one, it's a tricky question to answer because I don't think that a lot of these things are made for us to simply read and apply directly to our life.
Sure.
We'd be missing a lot of context. We'd be missing like a big thing. A big thing for the Orthodox is spiritual guidance, is having a prayer rule that your father in confession kind of gives you and sticking to it. And it's sort of the same thing in monastic life as well. And that is why you see such extremes, because there is a spiritual father that is doing. I mean, it's funny, but it's sort of like the archetype of the sensei, and like the little karate kid, and it's like, yeah, just hit the water 2,000 times and you'll learn something there. Same thing, obviously, like with Abba Moise St. John the Short, water the dead stick for 12 years, and obviously the stick like miraculously grew into a tree. It's these things where it's just spiritual fathers who have ascended in virtue, have spent their lives basically perfecting praise and how to live a Christ-centered life. And then through grace, through the Spirit, these disciples come to them and they ask them for direction. And so, and this happens. So at after St. John's father dies, an angel appears to him. His roommate was actually Saint Peshoy, Saint Paisios, another famous desert father. And the angel told them, "You go there, start a community of monks. You go there, start a community of monks." They were sad because they wanted to stay together. They were good friends. But they left and they started their communities, and their communities were thriving. And like that community that St. John went to is where St. Arsenius went. So the Spirit was directing the Abbas to their children to guide them. And they were the ones who are setting these rules, these guiding principles. So there's that spirit of discipleship that they had. So I don't think I think we'd be remiss, and potentially we might even be down a demonic path. Like the demons can use this stuff against us. They know this stuff better than we do.
Yeah.
They know the gospel better than we do. They can be using this stuff against us if we're just reading the sayings and being like, okay, flee people, be silent. Cool. I'm going to go flee people. Mm-hmm. That's like, no, now you're alone and you have no church community. You have no guidance, whatever. You're going to fall. Yeah. There's the story of the monk who was, who had a demon appear to him and say, you're such a good monk. The angels will lift you up when you jump off the mountain. The angels will carry you up. And he appeared as the form of an angel. And so he didn't tell anyone, because he's like, if I tell anyone, other monks will come with me and they'll want to steal that moment. And he jumps, he falls, he dies. He was lured by that goodness or whatever, and he was alone. So it's important not to take this stuff, not to take these words literally, and to keep in mind the context of the translation, retranslation, the oral tradition that lasted 200 years. Like, you might actually not be understanding the whole picture.
That's really fascinating, because it seems like you're applying a very orthodox understanding, which exists within these structures of like a very, very structured community discipleship. And I think that a problem, and I can say this to be a little bit critical of our own culture. A problem of Protestants is that we have a tendency to just look at something, read it, and then say, "Wow, this has changed my life. This is telling me what I should do." Like I've known people who have read the sayings of the Desert Fathers and decided that they needed to live really isolated lives, and it's like, wait, hold on a second, you found this book at Barnes and Nobles, dude. Like you just found a book and just decided to change your life on it, and there was no like I one of my favorite stories, I mentioned this when Thomas and I talked about Simeon Stylites, was he felt this deep call to, of course, live on top of this pillar in complete isolation. And there were local elders of a church who were like, we feel like this dude's doing this for attention. So they called him and said, you got to get off of this thing, dude. Like, we don't want you doing this. And he immediately submitted, which kind of showed that, like, this wasn't just a guy who had this like very Blues Brothers like call from God who just did what he needed to do. Like, he realized that he existed within a community, and that if he was to oppose or to disengage from that community, that he would be in sin by doing so. So that's a fascinating perspective, dude. I appreciate that.
And the first thing that when you hear Saint Anthony, you focus on the fact that he started monasticism, he lived alone. The first thing he did, first of all, he heard his call was the gospel at church. So he was, his story starts liturgically.
Yeah, he's not just this island just doing his own.
Exactly. And the first thing he does after is lived on the outskirts of the city with elders who taught him, and it says like that in the text, he said it taught him how to sleep on the ground, another elder taught him how to be humble, another elder taught him how to eat little. So the first thing he did is just go learn from elders, like be a disciple to someone else. So nice. It's easy to get lost in the sauce when you're just looking at this, like, okay, this is the starter monasticism, this is whatever. But it's just like, no. Take a second, look at what they did. It's not in a vacuum. It's all within this community. It's all very gospel, like entrenched in the gospel, entrenched in the life of Christ. And from there, they work with the Spirit, and the Spirit tells them what to do. And it shows them their life. Something I love, kind of like to bring it back full circle. There's a monk that wanted to talk to Arsenius. Arsenius would not give him the light of day. He's like, listen, but like, saints back then were, or like these desert fathers, they at some point they basically get celebrity status, and it still happens today. Like, humans love their idols, where if someone just like they're celebrities, and so people seek them out. People just want to, like, they obviously do miracles, so they even just want to like touch their. Some of them can tell the future. They just want to talk to them, ask them what's going to happen. Still happens to this day. So like some of these saints are actually like it sounds like what they're doing is harsh to avoid people, but they're like, it's actually detrimental to their spiritual life, because you can imagine if you're like it's like you're holding office hours for miracles. It's like, okay, come, what's up? You're healed.
He's just trying to dodge the paparazzi.
Exactly. Yeah, that's 100% it. And so this guy would not, like, Saint Arsenius was like, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm just no. And then that monk who was visiting was like, okay, well, can I talk to Abba Moses then? Is he available? And so the monk that was taking him around, he's like, Saint Moses is strong. Yep, let's go to him. He goes to him. He has an amazing time. And then this monk and Saint Moses actually, oh my goodness, I'm going on so many tangents. I will not say this other story. I'll stay on this path. We can chat about the fathers forever. So he has a wonderful time with Saint Moses, who was very hospitable.
Yeah.
And was great with people. So he just has a blast. And then he comes back to this monk who was taking him around, and he was like, I'm upset. He's like, what's up? He's like, how can both Arsenius and Moses be doing God's will if they're so different? One wouldn't meet me and wants to live alone and pray all the time and whatever, and the other just like hosted and made food and chatted with me and we laughed and whatever. How can they both be doing God's will? It makes no sense. And then this monk got a vision, and he saw, in that vision, he saw the Nile and two boats on the Nile. And one had St. Arsenius. He was meditating, he was praying, he was quiet. And on the other, there was St. Moses, and he was eating honey with the angels, and he was laughing and having a blast with the angels.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that vision, and while he was chatting with the monk, it became clear to him, like, these two boats are going to the same place. These two boats are heading to the same destination. One of them is sitting there in silence. The other is chatting and eating and whatever, both going to the same place. And that's what I love about the Desert Fathers, is that they're so different. And to me, the way I reconcile it is like the person on the left came from the palace, that life of lavishness. And so his path to salvation, he has to walk it alone a lot of the time. For St. Moses, he was dealing with a lot of lust, a lot of anger, a lot of that. So being with the brethren is where he practiced love of others, which is like the antidote for anger. And so that's his path to salvation. And both of them are saints of the church. Both of them are amazing. And in this vision, in this story, they're contrasted and they're going to the same direction, kind of things, just different styles. And I love that. And one last story from the life of Arsenius, again, about his background. Someone saw him, a shepherd saw him sitting on a pillow in the church. And the shepherd was like, this is Saint Arsenius that people talk about. This is the great saint. He's sitting on a pillow. And then the saint took him aside and was like, okay, what did you use to sleep on when you're at home? He's like, I slept on the ground, whatever, no pillows. He's like, cool. He's like, this guy was at the emperor's palace. And so this thing to him, like, he used to sleep on the finest linen. Right now, he's sleeping on a pillow. So you can see how much he gave up. And so the saint was, the monk was edified much because he understood. And that's another thing I love. It's like, it's not all equal. It's not the Desert Fathers, and the way that we read them doesn't tell you, and this goes for most sayings, it doesn't tell you sleeping on pillows is bad, or it doesn't tell you comfort is bad. It just says, did you sleep on, like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but did you sleep on, like, I don't know, like the world's most comfortable pillow? Well, sleep on a less comfortable one. You're doing great. Do what you can.
I don't know how our theological traditions might formulate and think about sanctification, differently. But I would think the way we would think of it is that sanctification is obviously going to take different shapes for different people, because they're different people. The rich young ruler comes to our Lord, and Jesus tells him he has to sell everything. Well, Jesus doesn't tell everybody that, but that man had to. That's what was standing in between him and discipleship, and so I think we can either, whether we're reading the story of the rich young ruler or reading the sayings of the fathers, if we don't have wisdom, we can just go, oh, well, if that was what worked for that guy, then that means I have to do the same thing. But I think you're really right pointing out that, no, it's the Spirit of God working in the lives of different people to sharpen and chip away at and mold the areas of their life that need to be shaped.
And that's why I think and this really goes back to what, Michael, you were saying earlier. Like, there is so much recklessness to, because I know people who look at the saying to the rich young ruler and they're just like, well, that's it for me. Like, I gotta, it's like every word that was ever spoken must be read as if it has significance and authority over us in our current context. And it's like, no, dude, like, context is really, really important. That doesn't mean that if you love your stuff, you should safeguard it selfishly, but it is to say that, like, Jesus and the Holy Spirit and interacting with the fathers is like this beautiful, perfect surgeon that's like it's not going to pull out your appendix if it's not ruptured. Like it's meant to like heal and to remove that which is blocking like that true love of the Father, that love of the Godhead. Michael, I think you're 100% correct in that we could talk about the Desert Fathers all day, but
Yep.
I unfortunately think that we got to start wrapping up soon. I feel bad saying it because I feel like we got so much juice left, but I think we got to wrap up. But I want to say, Michael, we super appreciate having you on. This was a big blessing, and we appreciate hearing your story, hearing just some of your background, and hearing your passion for the fathers, and just kind of letting us nerd out with you on that. That's been a blast. Everybody,
We'll have to do this again, man. Just keep the father's conversation going.
100%.
Absolutely.
Make sure to give Michael a follow. He is at Creative Orthodox on Instagram. He's also, I believe, got a link to a website where you can buy a couple. I think Thomas just picked up a coloring book, graphic novels, and some other artwork as well. Definitely support good, beautiful Christian art. Michael, any last words for us, my friend?
I just really want to thank you for this, and I can't tell you enough how happy this makes my soul to just have like minds to literally just nerd out and reflect on these and share these stories of the fathers at this I would say non-academic level, to actually just talk about how awesome these stories and impactful these stories are. So thank you so much, and I love what you're doing. I'm an avid follower of your podcast, and I can't wait to see where it's going to grow and all the directions it's going to go. So God bless what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
There's so much kindness in that, and I appreciate it. It feels only appropriate to end with probably my favorite story of the fathers that I think of often. And I should have prepared it before this because I'm going to go off the top of my head and probably butcher it horribly. But two monks, a father and their novice, were walking, and they were without water for a long period of time, and one of them prayed for water to appear, and water appeared before them in this small trickling stream, and so they both cupped their hands and started drinking from it. And as they were getting ready to depart, the older noticed that the novice monk, was starting to fill up his like little knapsack with water, and the older one just simply said, like, "What are you doing? Like, God is here. God is everywhere." And I just think about that, like why we're so quick to try to hoard up these like temporary blessings, realizing or forgetting sometimes that the God who has provided for us today will surely provide for us tomorrow. So Michael, we'll do this again sometime, man. Thanks so much.
For sure. Thank you.
All right, blessings, sir. All right, thanks guys. It's been Church History for Chumps. We'll catch you next time.